Alright guys, today I've got something for you which I think is quite funny. It's really useful as well, but also really funny and kind of embarrassing. So basically, you know how everyone always wants to talk about their successes to make themselves look good? Like, look at these big wins I've had, this great analysis I've done, oh, my trading is so brilliant. Well, what no one really talks about, or at least not that much, are their failures. And everyone has them. So today I wanted to share with you one of my failures. Basically, a few weeks ago, we put out this video about the lessons I learned while we were building an automated trading system. And in the process of making that video, I dug up a lot of the old indicators, tools, old versions of the system that we had built. And I came across some absolute shockers. So over time, I want to share with you some of them, tell you the story about them, tell you what went wrong, what we learned from it, how it progressed. But today I wanted to start off with the absolute worst one. Okay, so I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to explain to you the 5 or 6 points that we learned from it that I think everyone needs to learn from this absolute travesty. All right, so let me present to you my artwork that I like to call the path of least resistance. Yep, that mess you see on the chart there was not a joke. It was actually a serious indicator. So this was something that we called wick trends. I think we built it around 2013. And what it was meant to be is over a number of bars that you can choose. You can see you can choose on screen here. If we choose 200, it maps out every possible trendline variation across that many bars. Now you can see what ends up happening is we have hundreds, if not thousands, of possible variations. And well, if I said to you, spot which trend line you're going to trade based on, you're going to struggle a little bit. So let me give you a bit of a backstory on this absolute disaster of an indicator over here. So you may remember from the video about our automated trading system, I said that one of the struggles we had was with the system being able to understand the context of the market. So it could perform very binary type things like if this, then this, or picking out certain things in the markets, but it couldn't understand the context that those things were happening within. So it didn't exactly know when not to trade, when to increase position size, when to be more cautious, and so on. So what we had to do was figure out different things we could include that were going to help understand the context of the market in a very rule-based type of way. So we tried all kinds of things. These were the worst indicators that we built, and some of them I'll share with you another time. But this one was basically where we were thinking maybe we can start to include trend lines. But the problem with trend lines is that there are so many different variations. So we didn't know exactly how to rule out certain trend lines, what ones to use, and so on. So we built this indicator where we were going to be able to test it both manually and automated. So the automated version is easy. You can see which trend lines the price fails at, which one it breaks through, and what the common theme is between them. But manually is not so easy because I don't know about you, but trying to pick out where the price is failing in a mess like this is kind of like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Now, ultimately, we did find some things that led to us using trend lines, as some of you will know, but it wasn't without a huge amount of trial and error and some lessons learned along the way. And there are 5 points I want to share with you which we can use regardless of how we're trading, lessons that we can take on boards that are going to improve our trading with the context of seeing this absolute mess of an indicator and how to avoid having that mess in your trading results. All right, lesson number 1 from this is that perspective is everything. How you look at the charts, how you look at the analysis, how you look at anything in life. You can have 2 different people looking from complete different angles at the same thing and coming to 2 completely different conclusions. And if we look at this absolute mess of an indicator there, you can see that you might have 2 different people that are using trend lines, one coming away saying that they don't work, they're useless, and one coming away saying they absolutely work, they're the best thing ever. And the only difference between the 2 of them is that out of these hundreds of variations, one of them is choosing the right variation and one is choosing the wrong variation. So I think when it comes to tools or things in the charts, different ways of trading, sometimes people are a bit quick to make judgments about something when actually that's just down to their own perspective and what they've experienced with the markets before. If you really want to get down to the truth of the matter, you need to test things. And if you can test 1,000 different variations like that, then it kind of helps to be able to say whether something works or doesn't work. But ultimately, it all comes down to perspective. So I think the most important thing when you're trading, and especially when you're learning to trade, is to keep an open mind and never assume that you know absolutely everything, because you don't. All right, the second lesson from this chart diarrhea behind me is that context really matters. First of all, the whole reason we were doing this in the first place was to try and have different things to help us understand the context of the market, because having things too black and white just didn't work. You needed to be able to understand the context of what you were seeing these things within, and that's what we were trying to figure out with this. But then if you look at that chart and imagine that you're using trend lines, you have to remember there are these thousands of different variations. So instead, rather than just jumping into having one particular variation, understanding the context of the market so you can refine it and get yourself down to the few that really matter is going to be really, really important. You can't just say, oh, it's always going to be from wick to wick on these things, or it's going to be from body to body on these things. It matters about the context, because believe me, that mess behind me will change all the time depending on specifically how the price has been moving. So it's the context that changes which ones are relevant and which ones aren't. All right, number 3 from this wick trends mush is that you should never assume. So this relates to the first point a bit, and it's basically that too many people in trading assume something has or hasn't worked depending on the few interactions they've had with that particular tool, concept, movement, market, whatever, and they assign some sort of causality to what ends up happening. So the trade loses, it must be because of this. Trade succeeds, it must be because of this. This happened because this pattern happened before it, and whatever else. And what ends up happening is that people assign false causality to something and think that something caused what happens next, rather than it actually being a completely random occurrence. So for example, with that mess behind me, it might be that one person's trading one trend line, it doesn't work, and I think it's because trend lines in general don't work, whereas another person succeeds and thinks they do work, and ultimately this person might miss out in the future, this person might end up losing in the future and still stick with what they've been doing, and both could have been right and could have been wrong, because there's 1,000 different variations just from that 200 bars, and how you're going to pick the right few that will help you succeed. So rather than assuming and running the risk of having false causality, test things and know for sure. Number 4 is all about the importance of setting rules. And I don't just mean trade entry rules, but also rules about how you perform your analysis. You see, you might not use trend lines, and you might look at that smudge on my screen and say, well, that's not relevant to me, I don't use trend lines, and that's why I don't use them, because there are so many different variations. And what I'd say to you is, first of all, that smudge on my screen is not relevant to anyone because it's useless, but also it doesn't matter what type of analysis you do, whether it's technical analysis, fundamentals, and any specific approaches within each of those categories, you're still going to have a lot of possible variation, and a lot of it's going to be subjective. Okay, if the markets were objective and everyone could see things as they were and think rationally and logically about absolutely everything and knew what was right and knew what was wrong, there would be no opportunities out there. It's part of what makes the market so dynamic and so interesting is that everyone has their own subjective view. There are so many different variations of doing even the most simple things that there's always opportunities out there. Now, you can't ever assume that what you're doing is 100% objective. There are always going to be variations. And to make sure you're not picking one of the variations at random without realizing, like if you were picking out just one of those trend lines each time without having rules for what's going to make you choose one rather than another, if you don't have those rules, it's going to be random. There's going to be too many elements of luck involved. So at least by having rules, even if they're the wrong rules, you can refine your approach, make sure you're picking the same sort of variations each and every time, and if it's not working out, you just adjust your rules, but at least you're staying consistent, and that's the most important thing. Because too many people do things randomly without realizing what they're doing is random, because again, they've assigned false causality, they don't realize the context has changed, and there's so much variation. So at least, hopefully, seeing that disaster is going to help you to put things in perspective and realize with what you're doing, how many different variations there are, and how you need to set rules on even the simplest things if you want to be consistent. And the fifth and final point is about learning everything you're doing deeply. Because we have to process so much information that it's not good enough to just learn things at a surface level or try to go for a simplistic approach. You see, a lot of people think that trend lines are amongst the most simple things you can learn in trading. They spend maybe an hour learning what they are, how to draw them, and they think they're ready. And then some people will disregard them because they think they're too simple and they can't possibly work. But as you can see, even with something as simple as a trend line, there are hundreds of different possibilities at any point in time. So it's only by understanding your tools and concepts deeply that you can use this powerful computer in your head, your brain, to filter through the nonsense ones, get to the ones that are actually going to work. And sometimes without you even realizing how you're doing it, why you're doing it, what your brain's picking up on. But it's from the hours and hours of observations and deliberate practice, setting rules and really seeing how things play out and testing that you can train your brain to pick out the right ways. Because with how we use trend lines, with the Duomo method, there isn't just one standard way that we do them each time. We map them and then alter them and change them, and sometimes it's wick to body, sometimes body to wick, and all kinds of variations. But we're looking for specific signs that show us that that variation is the correct one. And it's only through understanding your tools deeply that you can pick up on those signs, and when you're trading and in the market, your brain can pick up on them in a split second. And it doesn't matter if it's with trend lines or anything else. It just shows that the more simple you try to be, the more surface level you try to be with how you learn and develop, the more likely you are to be completely random with your trading without even realizing, and completely at the mercy of luck, good or bad. You know, your brain is much more powerful than you might think, and in terms of trading, it can do some things that even the most powerful computers still can't do yet. Obviously, there are some things that the most powerful computers can do that we can't do, but there are some things we can do that they can't, and we need to play to that advantage. But if we keep things simple and binary, then it's not going to work out so well. We need to use our advantages, train our brain, learn things deeply, and then we'll be able to spot things that we don't even realize we're spotting. So just to summarize, this useless Wick Trends nonsense indicator that you can see behind me has some very important lessons for us. It doesn't matter how simple the thing that you're using is in the markets, there's likely to be loads and loads of different variations of how you could approach that. So we can never assume that what we're doing is definitely correct. You know, we might end up applying false causality to something that happens when essentially what we've been doing is a bit random and a bit based on luck. So instead, we need to set rules so that we can do things consistently, even with our analysis. We need to understand the context of when things are being used to understand the right or wrong way to do it, and we need to remember that context really matters to our trading. Nothing is so simple that you can just say yes or no depending on something you see. You have to take into account the wider context to understand how you need to vary things and how you need to approach it for that specific moment. And we need to remember that perspective is everything. You could look at something one way completely differently to everyone else, and you might be right and they're wrong, or they might be right and you're wrong. But we need to test things and make sure that everything we're doing is not just based on a whim, but is actually backed by something. So guys, I hope you found that useful. I'm sure you found my absolute failure of an indicator quite funny, but I've got a challenge for you now. I want you to leave me a comment below letting me know if you can find an indicator that's worse than that one. All right, find me the worst possible indicators you have, or ones that you've come across, ones that you've built, ones that you've used. Let me know, post them in the comment section, and maybe we can go through some of those in a future video. But until then, if you like this one, if you found some of it useful, hit the thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe for more, including more of my bad creations and some of the bad indicators that we're going to go through from your comments below. Take care, I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.